That huge wave crashing like that reminded me of the football field last night at the big house. I mean, that was amazing. So, yeah, it feels good to be a Michigan State fan today. For all of you Michigan fans, here's what I want to say is, to be honest, last night at the Saturday night service, I told everybody, go State. But I have to be honest and tell you, in my heart of hearts, I thought we were going to get trounced. So I think the weather conditions changed the dynamics of the game. Jim Harbaugh is a class act. Michigan is a class program. But go Sparty, baby. Come on. So... And if you don't agree with that, there will be an altar call at the end of the service, so just hold on. You can get right with God. And I'm a little delirious because this is my 12th sermon in 7 days. I preached at a conference on the east side of the state all this week. Jen and I got home late Friday night, and we had a fantastic time. It was an honor to preach for one of my mentors, Lauren Covarrubias. And in the front row, there happened to be a couple bishops of primarily black churches from Detroit. One of them is in his late 70s, and he actually marched with Martin Luther King Jr. And he's a bishop of a large, prominent black church in Detroit, and he was there. And there was a couple others. Bishop Merrick was there, and the congregation was about 40% African American, and so they were shouting me down all week. I mean, I was loving it because, we're kind of a lily white church if we're being honest about it, and we're getting a little bit better. But man, there was something about being in that church. I had a 99-year-old African American woman who came to all 3 nights. 99 years old. And so the pastor said, I want to introduce you to her. I met her and I said, I cannot believe you drove from Pontiac here 3 nights in a row. Had her son actually drive her there. And she goes, oh, honey, she goes, when there's a white boy who's on fire, I got to come and hear him. And I said, hey, I'll take that as a compliment. So hopefully you all have your hankies ready, because we're kicking off a brand new series this morning called Breakthrough. And for those of you who are unaware, we're also beginning, this is not only just a 6-week weekend series, but it is a 6-week church-wide intensive where on every weekend we're going to be looking at what breakthrough really means. And then every week in our community groups, we're going to be diving in deeper into how to walk out breakthrough, transformation, and change in our life. That's what breakthrough is really all about. When we use that phrase breakthrough, we're talking about breaking through barriers that have been limitations in our walk with God, in our life, in pursuing the things that we believe God has for us. Oftentimes in the journey of life, we come up against walls. We come up against barriers. We come up against obstacles and limitations that say, you're not going to go any further. And when we talk about breakthrough, what we're talking about is moving beyond those barriers. How do we experience breakthrough, which is transformation and change? Here's what I know about the God that we serve, is that God saves us at point A, but he doesn't leave us at point A. That's not his desire. His desire is to take us to point B, C, D, all the way unto the very thing that he created us to accomplish and to become. He saves us here, but he takes us there. And along life's journeys, there are multiple barriers and obstacles. For a lot of people, when we hit obstacles, we misinterpret those obstacles as our finish line. And what we don't realize is they're testing grounds. And when we pass those tests, we experience breakthrough, and we experience what 2 Corinthians says about transformation, that God is transforming us from glory to glory. God is a God who takes us a little bit here, a little bit there, line upon line, precept upon precept, from faith to faith, from strength to strength. And so for the next 6 weeks, that is what we are going to be zooming in and studying, because I believe with all my heart, God has a desire in his heart for you and I to break through some barriers. And here's what I want you to know. Don't miss any of the next 6 weekends. I know that our schedules are busy, but there's nothing more important than discovering the purpose that God has for our life, and then breaking through, learning how to break through those barriers. And if you're not plugged into a breakthrough group today, after the service, you need to go out to our tailgate party, sign up, get in one. We already have, over 150 groups scattered across Southwest Michigan, thousands of people already signed up in groups. Here's what I believe. I believe 6 weeks from today, if we lean in, we will be able to look back on our life as it is today and see a marked change and to be people that have experienced breakthrough beyond barriers that we never thought we would experience. So that's the challenge. So I want to invite you, if you brought your Bibles today, which hopefully you did, open them with me to 2 Samuel chapter 5. The title of this introductory message to this series is called Lord of the Breakthrough. Because I believe with all of my heart that God is a God of breakthrough. God is a God who desires change and transformation in our lives, and He comes to help us in accomplishing that. That's why He's the Lord of the breakthrough. I want you to look with me beginning in verse number 17, and it says this: When the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over all of Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David, and David heard of it, and he went down to the stronghold. The Philistines also went up and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And so David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into your hand. And so David went to Baal-perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, The Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breakthrough of water. Therefore, he called the name of that place Baal-perazim. And they left their images or their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. And then the Philistines went up once again and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. Therefore, David inquired of the Lord, and he said, You shall not go up, but circle around behind them and come up upon them in front of the mulberry tree. And it shall be that when you hear the sound of the marching in the top of the mulberry trees, then you shall advance quickly. For then the Lord will go out before you to strike the camp of the Philistines. And David did so as the Lord commanded him, and he drove back the Philistines from Geba as far as Gezer. I love this story of David's life as he's in a season and a moment of coming into the promises of God. You see, for probably about 20 years, David has carried a promise. God said, You're going to be king over all of Israel. You remember the story that David was, the youngest son, taking care of his father's sheep when Samuel showed up to anoint the new king of Israel. And it wasn't any of his brothers because they looked good on the outside, but God told Samuel, Don't look for the one that looks right. Look for the one who I indicate because I'm looking at a heart condition. And he calls for David. David comes running in from the sheep pasture, and Samuel says, You're the one. He anoints him as king. And it sets off a chain reaction of seasons in David's life that could have shipwrecked his faith. He goes out and he faces off against Goliath. You guys remember that story from Sunday school? He defeats Goliath when Saul and nobody else would face off against Goliath, this 9-foot giant of the Philistines. And after he defeats him, the crowds, the most popular song of their day became, Saul has defeated his thousands, but David has defeated his 10,000s. Well, Saul heard that song playing on the radio, and he didn't like it because there was a new leader, a new exalted leader in the nation, and so Saul set out on killing him. And David goes through a season of hiding in caves, on the run. There's a bounty on his head. He even lived in Philistia, the land of the Philistines, for a period of time because it was the only safe place to be. And all the while, he's on the run, he's slandered, he's accused of things, his wife is taken from him. He doesn't lose heart. He lives in a place called Ziklag. All of his possessions, all of his herds, even the families of the men who followed him, they were all taken captive. Everybody wanted to kill him. David doesn't lose heart. 20 years of this. And then there comes a moment, a tipping point moment in David's life when all of Israel came to him and said, David, we want you to rule over us. And David becomes the king of Israel. Ultimately, the promise that God gave him is now fulfilled. And the reason why it was fulfilled is because in that season where it seemed like everything was going wrong, he kept his heart right. And with every barrier and every obstacle that David came up against, he kept his eyes on the Lord because he was a man whose heart was after God. He wasn't insecure in his calling because he didn't call himself. He didn't have a reputation to protect because it was never his dream to become the king. All he ever wanted was to please God. All he ever wanted was to live his life for his purpose. And with every new obstacle that he came up, he would look at God and he would say, God, what do you want me to do? And he kept his heart right. And now, when we come into 2 Samuel chapter 5, it's just after David has been made king over all of Israel. It's just after David has gone up against the Jebusites in the city of Jerusalem, because you see, Israel conquered the land, but they never conquered the highest point, which was supposed to be their capital, which was the city of Jerusalem. The Canaanite group of people called the Jebusites held on to it, and nobody could defeat them. But David, first thing he does when he becomes king is he says, let's go get Jerusalem. And he conquers the Jebusites. And now, shortly after that, the Philistines, who didn't consider David much of a threat because he was never going to become the king of Israel, now they've heard he is indeed the king of Israel. And they muster all of their troops together and they say, let's go take care of David. We need to kill David before David kills us. And so that's where we pick up. It says that the Philistines heard that David had become king, and they said, let's go find David. So there's an all-out search to find David, and David hears that they're looking for him, and David's response is he goes looking for them. And he goes looking for them at a place that is described as the stronghold. The stronghold. We'll come back to that in a minute. The stronghold is a place within the territory of Israel that the Philistines had captured and held onto. It was a launch point. It was a base of operations behind enemy lines. And it says that the Philistines gathered themselves together in a place called the Valley of Rephaim, or Rephaim. And that in Hebrew means the Valley of Giants. And the reason why they gathered there is because if you've read Genesis, there's these odd scriptures where it talks about this huge race of human beings that were alive that were giants. They were giants in the land, and they were the sons of Anak, and for some reason they were huge, and Goliath was one of them. He was over 9 foot tall, and he wasn't the only one. He had brothers. How many know you don't want to mess with that family? There was a whole race of giants, and for some reason, they seemed to live and make their habitation in the people of Philistia, the Philistines. And they were the Navy SEALs of the Philistine army. And so they had a valley in the territory called the Valley of Giants, or the Valley of Rephaim, because that valley was the place of defeat for just about anybody who dared come up against them. And that's exactly where we see that when David hears that the Philistines are looking for him, he goes on a journey. He goes to a journey to the place called the stronghold that is located in the Valley of the Giants. And he's going there to square off with his arch nemesis, the Philistines. And he asks God, God, do you want me to go up? And I'm only going to go up if you're going to give me victory. And God says, David, I will surely give you the victory over the Philistines. I will most assuredly deliver them into your hands. It says, I doubtlessly will deliver the Philistines in your hand. And David has this massive victory. And why I love this particular story is not just because David is a person that I think most of us can identify with very well, because he had a heart towards God, but he was also very human, made a lot of mistakes along the way. God forgave a lot in David's life, but God also gave some incredible victories in his life that were unbelievable, that were inconceivable. Princess Bride quote there. Inconceivable. It was inconceivable for David to defeat Goliath. It was inconceivable for David to defeat the Philistines if it wasn't for the presence of God in his life. And as we launch into this series about breakthrough, I want you to understand some things about what breakthrough is, because what I don't want to do is just give you some great information or some nice little cliches that will encourage us and dull the pain of our life and our defeats. I don't want to do that. But there are some things that I think if we get a revelation about when it comes to breakthrough, moving through barriers, experiencing real change and real transformation, defeating enemies in our life, that if we'll understand a couple of the things I'm going to share with you this morning as a setup for the series, and if we lean in, if we go for it. Now listen, you can come to church, and we are so glad that you're here. You can go to church and you can listen, and the message of breakthrough will never become realized as breakthrough if you don't want it to. Or you can take these tools that we're going to give to you and we're going to talk about, and we can lean in and let the Holy Spirit come up and be present with us in this journey, and 6 weeks from now our lives can be changed. And the first thing that we need to understand about breakthrough that we find here in this story is that breakthrough begins for David as a sacred journey to the strongholds of the enemy, to the valley of giants. And it's a sacred journey. It says that as soon as he heard, he went down on a journey to the stronghold, and the Philistines deployed in the valley of the giants. It's a sacred journey because David did not go alone. God went with him. We all go on journeys, but God doesn't always go on those journeys with us. I mean, he's always present with us, but he's not intentional. He's not leading the charge in many of our journeys. Sometimes we just jump in the car and we go for trips, and obviously God is with us, but then there are times when God calls us on an adventure of faith, and we go on it knowing the risks, needing the faith, and God is very present with us. It's a sacred journey. And what we are about to embark on over the next 6 weeks is a sacred journey. It's not just a journey to anywhere. We, along with David, are going to the valley of giants, and we're going to face off against some enemies, some giants that have been in many of our lives, and we're going back to the place called the stronghold. Many of us have strongholds in our lives. You see, strongholds and giants are different. Giants are those intimidating, larger-than-life, insurmountable enemies that are outside of us, that are talking down at us, reminding us of our past, prophesying our defeat, intimidating us, trying to steal life, trying to steal destiny, trying to steal joy from us. And many times those are giants that become even more fearful for us because we've faced off against them before and they've defeated us in the valley of Rephaim. See, the giants are the external enemies, but the strongholds that we are going to visit are the internal. They're the internal. You see, a stronghold, let me give you a definition of a stronghold. A stronghold is a place of fortification, a place that has been dominated and fortified and occupied within an opposing territory. So here's what that means. It means if you and I are enemies and we have a border that we share, and you and I keep going to battle against each other, we're battling over that border. Now, if I come against you, Dan, and you come against me, and I have momentum on my side and I push into your territory, I invade your territory, and you come out to meet me. If I win a battle inside your territory, the first thing I'm going to do if I'm deep in your territory is I'm going to build a fortified base, a stronghold inside that territory that I can put weapons, soldiers, and then I'll retreat and leave some forces there in a fortified environment so that when I retreat, I can go and get more soldiers, more troops, and the next time I want to square off with you to get more territory, now I have a deeper starting point in your territory. And until you move me out of that stronghold, you're continually vulnerable. Now, in every one of our lives, in our walk with God, we have an inheritance, a territory that God has given to us. Promises of God, a calling and a destiny. But what happens is the enemy very often will rise up as a giant in our life, an issue in our life that speaks from the outside in, or he creates strongholds in our mind, in our thinking, in our thought patterns, in our belief systems that are within the land of our inheritance, but yet he has penetrated and won battles over decisions and arguments and debates and belief, where God has said, I will doubtlessly give you the victory, but instead we have doubted, and the enemy has built strongholds in our thinking. And he continually revisits and defeats us and keeps us from breaking through and possessing our territory because he has a stronghold in our decision making. Does that make sense? David goes back to the stronghold because he knows he's got to deal with it. David goes to the valley of the giants because God says, I'm going to give them into your hands. That's what this sacred journey was all about for David. And that's what this sacred journey is about for all of us, because all of us have some giants. I don't know what your giant's name is, but we all have giants. I don't know what your stronghold looks like, but we all have some strongholds. But here's what I know. You may have giants in your life and you may have strongholds in your mind, but you have a God of the breakthrough on your side. And you weren't created to be defeated. We don't go down to the valley of giants to be defeated. We don't go down to the stronghold to be taken captive once again and be made a prisoner. We're going down to the stronghold to take back what belongs to us, and we're squaring off with the giant once and for all and putting him in his place. See, when I was in 6th grade, I had a giant in my life. His name was Scott. I was a transfer student to a new middle school, and how many know there's no more awkward moment of your life than middle school? Is that true? I mean, I had so much acne on my forehead, you could read fairy tales in Braille. It was like, Mary had a little lamb. All the jokes you've ever heard about your mama dresses you funny, they were all about me. My mama did dress me funny. I remember my first day at Rogers Lane Middle School. I showed up there and I had rust-colored Levi corduroys on. When I walked, it was like sparks flew. It was like, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, pardon me. I had a green sweater on and Docksiders and feathered hair. It was the 80s, and a big old comb in my back pocket. Trapper keeper. And I showed up my first day of school nervous. You know how it is when you're a new kid. Everybody kind of checks you out, looks at that. What's he about? I was like a $1.20 dripping wet. I didn't know anybody. Few people were indifferent. Few people were nice. But one guy decided he's going to put me in my place. His name was Scott. Scott Okonski. So Scott, if you're watching, I forgave you a long time ago. But Scott was a giant. He was 9 foot tall. In 6th grade, had facial hair. He had a military blonde flat top haircut. He wore flannel shirts, Rustler jeans, and those hiking boots. Remember those buckskin hiking boots with the big soles on them and the red laces on? He wore the steel toes, and he wore those boots. And he was a hunter, and he was a husky kid. I mean, his nickname was the Ox because he had teeth growing out of his nostrils, like beaver teeth. I mean, I'm for real. And he was just mean. He lived in my neighborhood, and I avoided him on the first day, but first day he eyeballed me, and he just